Unlike many people who were introduced to Theodor Adorno in the Frankfurt School in their graduate education or later on in their life, I was actually got my introduction to Adorno at quite a young moment in my life, and it's an interesting story. I was 19 years old. I was very alienated from American society and from the educational institutions, particularly the colleges. I didn't really know what to do with myself back then. I was sort of adrift and lost and looking for things. However, I did love to read literature. I loved sociology, anything to do with history, social sciences. So I knew I wanted to study texts, but I hadn't yet figured out how to turn that into a living. Well, I was 19 years old, and my folks lived in California. One day I decided to go and visit San Francisco. So I took the train up to San Francisco and walked around the place and saw a bookstore. And just on an impulse, I went into the bookstore, looked around their philosophy section, and found one of the really good translations of Theodor Adorno by Edmund Jeffcott. And this is this translation of Minima Moralia. In many ways, his most accessible text. It's written as a set of small aphorisms. It's the most, I would say, media savvy of Adorno's texts. Walked out, not really realizing what a treasure I'd found, and then later I started to read it. And when I actually started to read Adorno seriously, it just knocked my socks off. Here was someone from a different cultural moment. 1930s Weimar Germany. He fled to America in the 1940s, and he wrote this book about the culture shock of finding himself in a strange new land called Hollywood. And his reactions kind of chimed with my reactions, with my initial reactions as to what's going on with American culture in the 80s and 90s. What's wrong with the society? What's not working about this culture? What are its internal contradictions? Adorno gave me the first sense of that there might be answers to these questions. The second thing that he taught me that I never got from almost any other writer was that you could be a philosopher and yet write beautifully. In fact, one was the precondition for the other. That aesthetic expression was much more important than just something that's pretty or nice. Somehow the way that you say things, the way that things are depicted, presented, has everything to do with the content. If you are true to the goal of human liberation, then the things that you do and that you create have to reflect that. They have to express this reality on some deep, fundamental, structural level, something that I wish more theorists would understand. One of the most common stereotypes about the Frankfurt School generally, and about Theodor Adorno specifically, is the charge that he was a sort of a gloomy sourpuss, an elitist snob who didn't like the media culture, and that everything was going to heck, and that he has nothing positive to say about any aspect of media society, media culture. And today I'm a media scholar, and I have to say, if anything, Adorno was an optimist about the media culture. My friends, the media culture is not your friend. The media culture is a gigantic industry, a set of transnational interests. And it's going to have all the contradictions of a giant transnational industry. It's mostly self-interested. It's there to harvest surplus capital. It's a creature of capitalism and therefore full of very toxic and scary contradictions. What Adorno gives us, though, which a lot of other people do not, is that for all of his doom and gloom, he did the hard work of analyzing the system, analyzing the media, and trying to come up with theories and ways to resist the system. For all the doom and gloom, he never once yielded to the temptation to just throw it all away and to blame people for their system. He would insist that, no, people can still be better than their system, but we have to critique that system. We have to find out how it works. One of the most important texts that he wrote, which is still fundamental to what I do as a media scholar, is his final completed work, Negative Dialectics. He did write one more aesthetic theory, never managed to finish it. He died of a heart attack before he finished that text, but this is his last completed text, which came out in 1966. One of the great philosophical texts of the 20th century, really a roadmap for the micro-political movements, and anyone who cares about the fate of humanity in the 21st century really should sit down and wrestle just a little bit with what Adorno is talking about. One of the most important concepts he comes up with in that text is the notion of the total system. And by this, he doesn't mean a sort of a Weberian cage, an iron nightmare of, oh, well, there's some big government controlling us. Or, well, there's just one giant corporation that's controlling us. He's pointing to the hegemony of markets, how markets create systemic rules which inflict a lot of violence on people, because those markets aren't constrained by rationality or humanity or democracy or any human need. The markets are interested in one thing: making money. Remember our good friend transnational capitalism and the media culture, which is dominated by that transnational capitalism. There you go. So all the parts come together. What Adorno gives us, though, are the tools to resist the situation. And the first step in resisting is figuring out how the system works. And he gives us lots of important tools. I'll mention just two others. The concept of the constellation, which is really a way of thinking historically about the transnational era, thinking about its pieces, its elements, and in particular this problem of belated and uneven development in the world system. Once you think of the world as a system, it's not the same. There has all these local differences, contradictions, and so forth. The second really interesting concept Adorno works with is what he calls the preponderance of the object. And this is actually something that I think most media scholars should really take much more seriously. This is this problem of people are shaped by their system. That doesn't mean that people are dumb, or that they're idiots, or that the system lies to them and they act out these false agendas, and that if only we told them the truth, they would be better than their system. The preponderance of the object points out to the problem that once you have a total system, once you have a setup where people go to work for a living and have to work for a living, and they're confronted with these vast bureaucracies and engines of private media, and they're flooded with media constantly, they have very little control over that. And therefore, they need to develop tools in order to decode those flows of media. Ultimately, the only answer is for them to become media citizens in their own right, to take back the media, to not just be passive recipients, to start to create their own media, to intervene in the meanings and the formations of the meanings, and to start to create their own hold over those things. And this is, of course, one of the central lessons of the digital era. This is a really important underlying political motif of today's media culture, the rise of the digital commons, and the fact that thanks to a lot of social changes in technology, structure, society, geopolitics, the audiences of the world are beginning to create their own networks of meaning and signification production, networks that are not commercial, networks that are not part of capital, but resist markets. And this is very scary to the mainstream media oligopolies. They don't know quite what to do about this situation. But I have to think that Theodor Adorno, wherever he is right now, would be greatly pleased to see that people learning from their history and finally learning to be better than their history.